I'm John Kramer, and this is Political FUBAR.
Political FUBAR.
So here we are, 4 days after the horrific shooting in Aurora, Colorado, and after listening, reading, and watching way too many news reports about that killing field in that movie theater, the big conclusion I've noticed everyone coming away with is that there is nothing we can do to prevent someone else from doing the same thing to you or someone you love. Not to your children, not to your wife, not to your husband or your mother or your father. No one is safe. And I'm sorry, but not only is the jury in on this, but we never actually needed to empanel one because everyone already knows that conservatives in this country would rather legalize drugs, prostitution, gambling, and reinstitute slavery rather than allow a single new restriction on handguns, assault rifles, or ammunition to get passed into law. Yup, that's just the way it is. And one of the brilliant but sometimes painful things about our democracy is that it is set up to protect the rights of a minority from the majority, which in this case would be the minority of Americans who love their guns the way Penn State used to love Joe Peterno, although in the long run that didn't work out too well for them. Just as I think this gun love isn't going to work out too well in the long run for conservatives. Because here's a fact. Guns keep getting better. They get lighter, faster, and more powerful all the time, while at the same time, our politicians keep making it easier and easier for anyone to buy them, which is why hundreds of people on the FBI's terrorist watch list have been able to buy guns. The NRA doubts the integrity of that list, so rather than denying a gun to a single possibly law-abiding citizen on the list, any suspected terrorist can buy anything he or she wants. So it's just a matter of time before the electorate in this country reaches a tipping point on gun control. 12 students and 1 teacher in Columbine weren't enough. Congresswoman Gabrielle Gifford, nope, not enough. 12 dead and 58 wounded while watching a movie, not enough. But one day, probably in the not too distant future, someone is going to do something so horrific, so beyond the scope of our imagination to understand or forget, that politicians will begin to stampede over one another in a cowardly rush to distance themselves from the gun lobby. And then maybe one day, we'll build a memorial on the Washington Mall to all the people who died and suffered because our politicians on both the left and the right put politics and a love of guns by a few above the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. But here's a footnote. Because that shooting happened during a showing of The Dark Knight Rises and the references to the Joker and John Holmes dyeing his hair orange, that tragedy in Aurora will always be linked to Batman. And one of the things I've always liked and admired about the character of Batman and the writers and artists and editors who collectively created him is the fact that he doesn't carry a gun and that he doesn't kill, which by the standard of today's action heroes makes him slightly tougher than Miley Cyrus, but which didn't stop him from bringing in over $160 million for the weekend, meaning that you don't have to kill at the box office.